Did you know that a single card once dominated over half of all top Clash Royale decks? Well, it's true. The card went from being in just 13% of decks to an unreal 50% usage rate in a matter of mere months. But here's what's truly shocking. The same card later went down to a 3% usage. What caused such a dramatic rise and fall? In this video, we're uncovering the hidden history of the Miner to better understand why it's become the most innovative card in Clash Royale history. It all started back in May of 2016, when Supercell introduced a new legendary card that would soon become a true game changer. Enter the Miner, a sneaky little digger that initially seemed just like another addition to the ever-growing roster of Clash Royale troops. When the Miner first popped up in the arena, players were intrigued but not really overwhelmed. With a quite normal 13% usage rate, it was clear that people were still figuring out the best way to utilize this very unique card. But what was so game-changing about the card? It was the Miner's unique ability to be placed anywhere in the arena. Think about it for a moment. For the first time ever, you could now deploy a troop directly behind enemy lines. No more waiting for your troops to slowly march across the bridge while your opponents build up their defenses. The Miner could just pop right into the enemy's tower, catching them completely off guard. This new mechanic threw existing strategies into utter chaos. Suddenly, players had to completely rethink their defensive setups. How do you protect against a threat that can appear anywhere at any time? Well, the Miner forced everyone to stay on their toes, constantly guessing where the next enemy attack might come from. As players began to experiment with the Miner, they discovered its incredible versatility. It could be used as a tank, soaking up damage while other troops dealt the main damage. It could sneak in and take out support units hiding behind tanks. And of course, it could chip away at towers, applying constant pressure that was hard to defend against. The Clash Royale community was buzzing with excitement. Every day, players were coming up with new and innovative ways to use the Miner. It was showing up in all sorts of deck archetypes, from control to beatdown. The meta was evolving at a rapid pace, and at the center of it all was the Miner. Just 2 weeks after the Miner's release, Supercell dropped an unexpected buff that would change everything. They increased the Miner's deploy time, making it pop up faster than ever before. This might seem like a small tweak, but in a fast-paced world of Clash Royale, every millisecond counts. As word spread about the Miner's power, its popularity skyrocketed. Players wanted to unlock and level up this new game-changing card so badly. Within 1 month of its release, the Miner's use rate had more than doubled, shooting up to over 25% in top ladder decks. Yup, in less than 30 days, the Miner went from being in just 1 in 10 decks to featuring in 1 in 4. The Miner had arrived, and it was clear that Clash Royale would never be the same. But this rise was just the beginning of the Miner's wild journey. The Miner was about to embark on a roller coaster ride of meta shifts, buffs, and nerfs that would cement its place in Clash Royale history. But you'll never believe what happened next. July 4th, 2016, a day that Clash Royale veterans would never forget. Supercell was about to drop a bombshell, and they themselves didn't even know it. In a twist that no one saw coming, Supercell accidentally reduced the Miner's deployment time from 1 second to 0.75 seconds. Now, a quarter of a second might not sound like much, but in this lightning-fast world of Clash Royale, it can change many interactions. This tiny buff meant that the Miner could stop moving and attacking faster than ever before. Imagine your opponent's surprise when the sneaky little Miner popped up and started swinging before they could even blink. The best part, the buff wasn't even mentioned in the patch notes. But here's where things really get interesting. This bug wasn't just a one-day glitch. No. It stuck around for weeks, wreaking havoc on the meta. Players who had gotten used to dealing with the miner suddenly found themselves facing a buffed version that was much harder than ever to counter. The impact on gameplay was massive. The extra quarter second meant the miner could get in more hits on the tower before even being taken out. It could reach and eliminate support troops even faster, completely disrupting carefully planned pushes. The Clash Royale community was buzzing with excitement once again, and frustrations in equal measure. Forums and social media were flooded with players complaining and sharing their experiences about this new broken miner. As the weeks went by and Supercell remained silent, the anticipation built. Would they acknowledge the mistake? Was it even a mistake? Would they revert the changes? Or would this accidental buff become a permanent feature in the game? Meanwhile, the miner's popularity was skyrocketing. Remember how it was in a quarter of top ladder decks before? That was nothing, because its usage rate was about to hit a mind-blowing 50%. That's right, the miner was now featured in half of all top-tier decks. It was everywhere, digging its way into nearly every match and every strategy. Players were pairing the miner with other powerful cards like the Electro Wizard and Poison, creating combinations that were nearly unstoppable. These synergies only increased the miner's effectiveness, cementing its place at the top of the meta. Finally, after 7 long weeks, Supercell broke their silence. They admitted that the miner was in a state it wasn't supposed to be in. The accidental buff had turned the balanced miner into a meta-dominating card. But even as they announced plans to revert the changes, the miner had already left a significant mark on Clash Royale history. As things cleared and players prepared for an upcoming nerf, one thing became very clear. Not everyone was thrilled about the miner's dominance. The community was about to be divided, and the great miner debate was just beginning. As the miner's popularity continued to soar, Clash Royale community found itself divided into 2 passionate camps. The pro-miner players who couldn't get enough of the versatile card, looking at you, B-Rad, and the anti-miner crowd who felt the card was ruining the game that they once loved. On one side, you had the miner enthusiasts. These players argued that the miner brought a fresh, exciting dynamic to the game. They pointed out that the card required a high level of skill to master, rewarding clever plays and creative strategies. The miner isn't just about raw power, they'd say. It's about outsmarting your opponent, predicting their moves, catching them off guard. For these players, the miner represented everything that made Clash Royale great. Strategy, quick thinking, and the thrill of outplaying your opponent. But not everyone was singing the miner's praise. The anti-miner faction was growing louder and louder by the day. They had some compelling arguments of their own. These players felt the miner's ability to be placed anywhere in the arena, combined with the additional accidental buff, made it just way too powerful to counter effectively. It's not fair, they'd argue. How are we supposed to defend against a troop that can pop up anywhere at any time? The impact on tournament play and ladder rankings was undeniable. Top players were incorporating the miner into almost every deck archetype. By this time, it became a staple in popular combinations like Miner Poison, which could chip away at towers while countering swarms. The versatility of the miner meant that even if your opponent knew that you had it, they could never be sure when you'd use it next or where you'd use it next. The Clash Royale community had never seen anything quite like this before. Every match, every tournament, every balance change discussion inevitably circled back to one question: what should be done with the miner? Supercell found themselves in a tricky position. On one hand, the miner was clearly popular, being featured in a staggering 50% of top ladder decks. Players were having fun with it, coming up with new and innovative strategies. On the other hand, such dominance in the meta could lead to frustration for those struggling to counter it. Finally, in August 2016, Supercell made their decision. They announced that it would be reverting both buffs to the miner: the intentional deploy time increase and the accidental reduction. It was a move to bring the miner back to its original pre-buff state. So was the miner's story finally over? Definitely not. His journey was about to take some unexpected turns, and the question on everyone's mind was, what will the miner do next? Just when players were ready to write off the miner, this little digger proved it still had some tricks up its old sleeve. At first, the nerfs hit hard, and the miner's usage rate took a plummet. Players who had grown accustomed to the miner finally found themselves struggling to make it work for the first time. The miner went from being in half of top decks to barely making a dent in the meta. It seemed like the sun had set on the miner's reign, but here's the thing. Clash Royale is a game of adaptation, and boy did players adapt. As the dust settled from the nerfs, clever strategists started to look at the miner in a whole new light. Instead of relying on it as a primary win condition, they began to use it as a secondary threat or a chip damage dealer. The miner might not have been an unstoppable force as it once was, but it still had a unique ability to pop up anywhere on the map. Players started pairing the miner with high damage troops, like the balloon. This combo was a true game changer. While the opponent was busy dealing with the miner, the balloon would float in and boom, it wreaked its havoc. It was like a magic trick. Now you see the miner, now you don't, and oops, there goes your tower. But the miner's journey back to the top wasn't without its challenges as well. New cards were being released left and right at this time in Clash Royale, each one threatening to kill the miner's existence. The rise of giant and graveyard decks posed a particular problem. How could one miner compete with the raw power of a giant or the spooky surprise of a graveyard? Entered the era of miner control and miner poison decks. These new archetypes showed that the miner didn't need to be the star of the show to be effective. In miner control decks, players used the miner to chip away at the tower while defending and counter pushing. It was like death by 1,000 paper cuts, slow, methodical, and incredibly frustrating for opponents. And let's talk about the miner poison combo again. It was a match made in Clash Royale heaven. The miner would sneak in, tanking the damage while the poison melted away all the enemy troops and dealing damage to the tower at the same time. This synergy was so effective that it became a go-to strategy for many top players. But the miner's versatility did not stop there. Players discovered that it was great at taking out key support troops like the Princess and the Dart Goblin, heck, maybe even a Musketeer. You know those annoying troops that hide behind the tanks and pelt your forces from afar? Well, the miner became their worst nightmare. The assassin popping up right next to them and taking them out before they could say positive elixir trade. Speaking of elixir trades, the miner became a secret weapon against elixir collectors as well. That's right, our sneaky little friend could pop up right next to opponent's collector and start chipping away at it immediately. If left undefended, the miners could single-handedly shut down the opponent's elixir advantage. As players continued to experiment and refine their miner strategies, something incredible happened. The miner's usage rate started to climb again. Slowly but surely, it clawed its way back up the ranks, and by the end of 2016, just a few months after this big double nerf, the miner was featured in 25% of top decks once again. It was a comeback for the ages, proving that sometimes it's not about just raw power, but about versatility and clever play. But how did the miner manage to always stay relevant in a constantly changing meta? Let's dig into the miner's incredible journey of adaptation. So what's the miner's secret weapon? Versatility. The little digger wasn't content with just one role. No, it became the ultimate chameleon of Clash Royale, changing its colors to fit any deck or any strategy. One minute it's tanking damage for your 3 musketeers. The next it's sneaking in to chip away at enemy towers. Let's break down the many faces of the miner. First up, we've got the miner as a tank. Sounds weird, right? How can this little guy be a tank? Well, its ability to pop up anywhere made it perfect for soaking up damage while other troops like the balloon did the heavy lifting. But the miner wasn't just about brute force. It could play the role as a support troop like a pro. Need to take out a pesky princess behind the tower? Miner's got you covered. And let's not forget its role as a win condition. The miner might not pack the punch of a P.E.K.K.A, but its consistent chip damage could whittle down towers over time. Pair it with a spell like a poison, and you've got a recipe for victory that drove many opponents to frustration. Speaking of pairings, the miner spawned some of the most popular deck archetypes in Clash Royale history. Remember Miner Control? The deck used the miner to chip away at the towers while defending and counter pushing. Then there was a Miner Poison, a combo so effective it became a staple in competitive play. The miner would tank, and the poison melted away enemy troops and tower health at the same time. This specific combo was made popular by the Clash Royale YouTuber B-Rad. It was simple, effective, and incredibly annoying to play against, especially against skilled players. And who could forget Lava Loon? While the Lava Hound and the Balloon were the stars of the proverbial show, the miner played a crucial supporting role, taking out air targeting units and providing extra tower damage. But here's the really impressive part. The miner didn't just find a niche and stick with it. As the meta shifted and new cards were introduced, Miner kept reinventing itself. When beatdown decks were dominating, the Miner found a place as a secondary win condition. When control was king, it became a key piece of chip damage strategies. This adaptability didn't go unnoticed in the competitive scene, far from it. From 2017 to 2019, the miner maintained a consistent presence in top tournament decks as well. We're talking about over 20% usage rates in major tournaments. That's really impressive for a 3 elixir card that had been around for years. The miner's impact on competitive play can't be overstated. It forced players to always be on their toes, never knowing where the next attack would come from. It created mind games within mind games, with players trying to predict miner placements and counter placements. The level of prediction at this time was insane. It was really becoming a crucial part of Clash Royale, predicting miner locations. The Little Digger added a whole new level of strategy to high-level play. But there were new strategies and cards emerging that threatened to put our versatile friend back underground for good. The miner was about to face its toughest challenge yet, but how would it adapt this time? Mini P.E.K.K.A and Valkyrie was the dynamic duo that had miner players sweating. These two cards quickly rose to prominence as the go-to miner counters, and for good reason. The Mini P.E.K.K.A, with its very high damage output, could take down the miner faster than you could say pancakes. And the Valkyrie? She was a one-woman army, her splash damage making short work of the miner and any supporting troops around it. As these counters gained popularity, the miner's dominance seemed to be on shaky ground. But here's the thing about Clash Royale players. They're nothing if not adaptable. Miner enthusiasts were not about to let their favorite card go down without a fight. They started getting creative with their miner placements, turning the arena into a high-stakes game of whack-a-mole. Players began placing the miner in the corners of the arena. It wasn't just to be fancy. This clever tactic made it harder for opponents to predict and counter effectively. Suddenly, defending against a miner wasn't as simple as dropping a Mini P.E.K.K.A in the middle of your side or on the side of the tower. And let's not forget about the miner's best friends, swarm units. Pairing the miner with cards like goblins or bats created a nightmare scenario for opponents. Focus too much on the miner and you get overwhelmed by swarm. Ignore the swarm to deal with the miner and watch your troops melt away. But perhaps the most interesting development was the rise of safe spots for miner placement. Players discovered specific tiles where the miner could be deployed to avoid being pulled to the king tower by the devastating tornado. It was like finding a cheat code in the middle of a game. Its usage rates may have dipped a bit, but it was far from the dramatic fall that many had predicted. The miner had proven its resilience once again, adapting to new threats and finding new ways to shine. But the biggest test in the miner's reign was yet to come, and it would shake the very foundations of Clash Royale forever. The miner had been a staple in Clash Royale for years, loved by many for its unique ability to pop up anywhere in the arena. But here's the thing, Supercell found themselves caught between a rock and the proverbial hard place. On one side, you had passionate miner fans who argued that the card was perfectly balanced. On the other side, there were players who felt the miner's consistent chip damage was just too strong. So what was the big debate all about? It all came down to the miner's crown tower damage. You see, unlike other troops, the miner could consistently chip away at towers without much risk. Some players argued this made the card far too powerful and versatile, while others claimed it was the very trait that made the miner so special and good for the game. Supercell had to make a very tough call here. Should they leave the beloved miner as is and risk it dominating the meta forever? Or should they make a change that might upset a large portion of the player base? In March of 2020, Supercell finally made their decision. They reduced the miner's crown tower damage from 40% to 35%. This change aligned the miner with the damage reduction that had already applied to spells in previous balance updates. How did this impact the gameplay? Well, miner decks suddenly had to work a bit harder to secure that old reliable tower damage. Players who relied on the miner as their primary win condition found themselves needing to be a bit more creative. It was almost like someone had turned up the difficulty slider on their favorite strategy. But here's where things get especially interesting. Despite the nerf, the miner refused to go quietly into the night. Oh no. Its usage rate only dropped slightly, and soon enough, it was creeping back up close to 30%. It turns out the miner was even more resilient than anyone had expected. So why did the miner manage to bounce back this time? Well, for starters, players realized that even with reduced damage, the miner's ability to appear anywhere on the arena was still incredibly valuable. They started using it as more of a support troop or a tank for other damage dealers than they previously had. The miner might not have been hitting quite as hard, but it was still creating opportunities for devastating pushes. But the story simply doesn't end there. Supercell was not done experimenting with this card. In August of 2020, they dropped yet another nerf. The miner's crown tower damage was being reduced yet again, this time from 35 to 30%. The second nerf hit even harder. The miner's usage rate plummeted to an all-time low of 11%. For a moment, it seemed like the era of the miner might finally be over for good. But if there's one thing we've learned so far about Clash Royale players, is that they're nothing if not resourceful. Slowly but surely, players found new ways to make the miner work. They started pairing it even more with cards like Poison to maximize damage output. They used it more for its utility rather than its damage potential. By the end of 2020, the miner had climbed its way back to a respectable 25% usage rate. And it was then that the famous Nerf Miner meme was born. The miner continued to dominate the meta for the next 2 years. Many decks featuring the miner were being played by top ladder and mid ladder players alike. In fact, in the 20-win challenge, there were some extremely low elixir cost miner decks which were winning the entire thing, which showcased how strong and versatile the miner was. Paired with the wall breakers, the miner was a force to be reckoned with. The miner wall breakers combo was at its peak in 2021, and it still remains relevant to this day. Players and content creators like Morton and Remy Eli were showcasing their high-level miner gameplay with further increased popularity for the card. With the release of Champions in Clash Royale, the miner's popularity did take a very small hit for a very short while. But soon people found different decks, which abused the Champion 3-card cycle tactic with, you guessed it, the miner, making it even faster to cycle miners on the opponent's towers. Golden Knight and Archer Queens were the best paired champions with the miner, and they gave birth to many miner poison and mortar miner decks. In 2023, miner poison was becoming way too strong, and it was everywhere in the game. Cries for the minor nerf echoed throughout the community, this time louder than ever. Finally, Supercell had to step in. On April 4th, 2023, Supercell decided to implement one final nerf to the minor to halt its ever-growing popularity. Its crown tower damage was reduced to 25% of its full damage. At last, it seemed like the minor had finally been balanced. Since then, the minor hasn't received any more balance changes and has remained quite balanced. It's still considered strong by many, never really falling out of the meta entirely. Minor Poison, Mortar Minor, Lava Minor, Minor Loon, and Minor Wall Breakers all remain relevant today. This card has gone from being a primary win condition of the deck to a secondary win condition, often providing support for the main damage dealing cards. New minor decks are popping out of the meta everywhere, and now everyone awaits the minor evolution. Hey, maybe in 2025. As we look to the future, one thing is clear. The minor story is far from over. With each new card in balance change, this versatile troop finds new ways to remain relevant. Who knows what new card synergies and strategies players will discover around the minor next? The minor has truly changed the dynamics of Clash Royale. And one thing's for sure, the minor isn't going anywhere anytime soon.